I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Ezekiel, the 21st chapter, Ezekiel 21. We're in Lesson 5. We talked last week about the sword. Sometimes people call this the parable of the sword. But we're in a section of Ezekiel where Ezekiel is in captivity, Babylonian captivity. He's being God's messenger to the people there. They think they'll be out in a couple of years and go back to Jerusalem. That's false teaching. And therefore, they need to understand they're going to be there a full 70 years. This is discipline, the judgment coming upon the people because of their sins. And we're going to see just how sinful they were in Ezekiel's text. And what we'll find is that he uses the sword. And I want us to see the principle and understanding of God's word, because we know that the Chaldeans are coming with their sword. But if you look at chapter 21 and verse 3, when he says, I say to the land of Israel, thus saith Jehovah, behold, I am against thee, and will draw forth my sword, out of its sheath, and will cut off from them the righteous and the wicked. The righteous and the wicked? I can see the wicked. They're deserving of this, aren't they? But no, it's the righteous and the wicked. There's consequences being the people of Israel. When your leaders, like the high priest, like the king, like the prophets, all fail you. And then there's no one left that Ezekiel could point out to God that would save the city from what's about to take place. It is my sword, but he's going to now speak about the fearful sword of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, that's going to come through and kill the people, especially old men, as we see in Kings and Chronicles. They fled to the sanctuary, the old men, they just ripped them up. It's a slaughter. It's a slaughter. And we talked about what makes it so fearful. This is an ode, this is a dirge, this is something that is to be lamented, and he wants Ezekiel to cry, he wants Ezekiel to sigh. As we'll see here, verse 6, sigh therefore, thou son of man, that's Ezekiel, with the breaking of thy loins, and with bitterness shalt thou sigh before their eyes. As he's telling them that what's going to happen to you, the word's going to come out. Verse 7, wherefore sighest thou? Thou shalt say, because of the tidings, for it cometh, and every heart will melt, and the hands will be feeble, every spirit shall faint. And he says, the knees shall be weak as water. Behold, it cometh, and it shall be done, saith the Lord Jehovah. You sigh before the people in Babylonian captivity. Your brothers over here in Jerusalem, you're going to get the news that the sword has arrived. It's my sword, but it's in the hands of the Chaldeans that comes forth. So we hear the song. It has meter to it, has beat to it that we don't understand, but we can read this. And this is what makes it fearful. Verse 9. Thus saith Jehovah, a sword. It is sharpened. My Bible says it's also furbished. What does that mean to you? It's polished. It's connected with lightning that strikes, it shines. And when that sword is being used, it's polished steel. It's like lightning. Not that it goes fast. It's just bright, shiny, polished, as it cuts through people and is involved in kill them. It is sharpened that it may make a slaughter. We'll see that they cut off their noses and they cut off their ears. They were cruel in their using of the sword. And he says, the rod of my son, it contemneth every tree. This is where it becomes difficult. You have secondary understanding of it in your footnotes. But what makes sense to me is what we see about Judah. Remember, this is going against Jerusalem. He's emphasizing that Jerusalem was the capital, just like in Samaria, we see in that area. I want you to notice, what about Judah? These were the kings of Judah now. These are not the northern kings. And we read in Genesis, the 49th chapter, where father of the 12 tribes of Israel, he's involved in setting forth blessings upon the upon the various tribes and speaking about who they are. In chapter 49, listen to this about Judah. Judah is a lion's whelp. Where have we seen that in Ezekiel the last few weeks? Remember the parable of the two lion cubs? And that was indeed the kings, the last kings of Judah. He said, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion. We saw the mother of those lions in here in Ezekiel in last week's lesson. As a lioness, who shall rouse them up? And he says, a scepter shall not depart from Judah, for the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh, tranquility, peace, till that comes. Will that be in their time when the war is over, or that's the coming of Jesus? He would come from the tribe of Judah. And he'd be one that would rule over the people with righteousness. Well, that rod is wooden. It's a scepter. It was what was saying, here's our authority. Here's my authority as king from the tribe of Judah. And these are involved with this. Now, he's saying here the sword. If you insert the word sword here with the idea of pronoun it, when it says slaughter is furbished as maybe as lightning, shall we make mirth? Shall we be fun about that? It doesn't mean anything. The rod of my son, it contemneth or looketh down upon every tree. Put the word sword there. The sword is coming down to cut every wood, even the scepter of Judah. Because he continues to talk about the sword, and it is given to be furbished, the sword. And so I think the secondary meaning, it contemneth the rod of my son as every tree. The sword is coming from my sword, God says, but it's from the Babylonians. And you're not going to escape it. And you may be saying, oh, that will never happen to us. We got our kings, and that's not going to happen to us. And these people are thinking, about in a couple of years, we'll be out of here. And we'll be back in Jerusalem. Not so. It's going to be a horrible slaughter that's coming upon them. Continue that thought as we go into verse 12. The sword of my people, smite therefore upon thy thigh. Why don't you slap your thigh? Because it is horrible what's happening to you. You slap your thigh, as Jeremiah was to do when there was so much difficulty of facing them, that they were going through that difficulty. And therefore it made it, it's a catastrophe happened. They slapped their thigh because they're remorsing of what is taking place. For there is a trial. You want to test this? There's a trial. And what if even the rod that contemneth shall be no more? What if the rod of the scepter of Judah that the sword condemns, the sword looks down upon, it contemneth that rod? Picking up what we saw in the secondary meaning in our footnotes. Same is the point here. What if Judah stops? So be it. And they would think, oh, this is our rule. It's just a piece of wood. And just like Nehushtan, just a piece of brass, that brazen serpent. And here was what was showing the rule of Judah, it's going down. Do they have any kings after Zedekiah? In the southern kingdom, they come back until Shiloh comes, till peace comes. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But so there is a trial. What even if the rod that contemneth shall be no more? Not the rod. Someone will say, well, the rod that contemneth is the rod of Judah, so it's not going to happen to us. So it looks down upon the fact of God coming. Or really could be, as it speaks about the sword, it cuts down every tree. That's what a sword can do. It's polished. It's steel. It's that which is like lightning because it shines and glitters as it cuts through the bodies and so forth. Now therefore, Son of man, prophesy and smite thy hands together, and let the sword be doubled a third time. Count it with me. Double. 1, 2, 3. Why would you say that? Because I've said in verse 15, I set the threatening sword against all their gates, and their heart may melt, and their stumblings be multiplied. It is made as lightning. It is pointed for slaughter. Gather together, go to the right. And he says, and set thyself array, and go to the left. As he sees the others, whithersoever thy face set. Left, right, double, 3 times means there is indeed slaughter taking place. Now some think, well, there was a punishment of 3 times coming upon Jerusalem, with Nebuchadnezzar coming 3 different times. I think the picture is that sword, and it is glistening, cutting through people, slaughtering people, that indeed it is that bad. Slap your thigh. It is horrible. This is coming upon the people because they've sinned. I will also smite my hands together, and I will cause my wrath to rest. Slap my hands together, let the slaughter begin. And then when I'll have my rest. I'll cause my wrath to rest. I, Jehovah, have spoken it. What makes it fearful? We're not little play swords, not little lightning rods. We're not, this is real war. The cry of the soldiers as they come through the opening of that wall that's now been besieged, that they've been around for 2 years. And we'll see as we get into this part of Ezekiel that indeed we saw Zedekiah say, well, I'll depend upon Egypt. 2 years into that besiegement, Egypt came in, and for a while the Chaldeans left. And Zedekiah, see, they're going to help. And God sent Jeremiah. We saw this in Jeremiah. No, they're not going to help you. You're not going to help you defeat them. But Zedekiah had promised with an oath. We talked about that last time. The people thought, we've made an oath with Nebuchadnezzar. They're not going to bother us. And yet here were people already in captivity. They're just there for a little while, they thought. They didn't think about the idea of the 70 years and the fact that God would bring them back. But this is the time of God's wrath that is being set forth, and that needs to be understood. So anything you want to add to the fearfulness of the sword? I guess you have to be at the point of it to really be fearful, but you can just see it, and you can feel it. It's sharp, and it's for slaughter. Right, left, right, to be accomplished. Question number 15. In chapter 21 and verse 14, who is the great one that is wounded with a sword? I'll read it. Thou therefore, son of man, prophesy and smite thy hands together, and let the sword be doubled the 3rd time, the sword of the deadly wounded. It is the sword of the great one that is deadly wounded. Who might that be?
It's possible that, just like in verse 25, the deadly wounded is the Prince of Israel. Some commentaries suggest it's that.
Yeah. Or the princes are signifying the kings as a group. And of course Zedekiah would be put to death. But he said, thou deadly wounded wicked one, the Prince of Israel. I think he's pointing to one whose day has come. He'll go into captivity, but he won't come back. Jeconiah will continue to live. Zedekiah dies. And so he said, the deadly wounded wicked one, in the time of their iniquity, it will end. They go into their chambers, and they're able to bring forth the pain. Back in verse 14, they entereth into their chambers of the princes, the ones who are leading the people, the king in particular, and with a sword killing the people. And here is the great one, the prince, the king, the scepter of Judah. We rule. Piece of wood. We're coming to destroy. It's God's sword. God's spoken it. His wrath. And we're going to pick up it's just how wicked the people were. But this is just the fear of the sword that is taking place, and that becomes important. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's coming. So question number 16, what part did the shaking of arrows, the teraphim, and the liver, animals' livers, play with the king of Babylon's decision to come upon Jerusalem. He's got a choice. And this is where the scene changes. The word of Jehovah came unto me again, says Ezekiel. Also, thou son of man, he said, appoint thee 2 ways, that the sword of the king of Babylon, notice my sword of the king of Babylon, his instrument to do his bidding is bringing judgment upon the people of God, that the sword of the king of Babylon may come. They twain shall come forth out of one land, and mark out a place, mark it out as the head of the way to the city. Thou shalt appoint a way for the sword to come to Rabbah, that is the city in Ammon, that is east of the Dead Sea. He's coming from Nebuchadnezzar. Is he going to go there, or is he going to come southwest to Jerusalem? Which one would he discern? Well, if you are a king, a heathen king, what might you do? Well, I go down here, there's a fortune teller down here. That's always been an abomination to God. But no, he's not going to do that. What is he going to be doing? How is he going to determine the way he should go? Well, verse 21. For the king of Babylon stood at the parting of the way, at the head of the 2 ways, to use divination. That's what the nations did around them. You know why that was so popular with Judah? Because we want to be like the nations. We want to be like them. So he shook the arrows to and fro, let them fall away, and said, we'll interpret what that means. I remember when we played pickup sticks, and there was a game, you didn't want to move other sticks, but you had to pay attention to what you had. Well, they looked upon that. We saw, and it fell, and somehow the divine spirits, they tell, this is what that means. That could be very subjective. Sometimes we flip a T, see who's going to tee off first. If it's close to me, that's me. Well, that's pretty good to interpret. But here are the various sticks, and they meant something. Or they might have a little idol called a teraphim, that indeed they could relate to that idol. Of course, the idol is not going to speak, but I think he said this. I think we might want to go this way. Or looking at the liver. Different ways of divination. None of them is saying, God, what would you have me to do? Nebuchadnezzar is an instrument in the hands of God, but he hasn't learned how powerful God is either. And he will do that. But what did that make? That's the decision we're going to make. We're going to come, and as we see, he's coming to Jerusalem. And notice in verse 23, when we look at that, how were some viewing, our question 17, how are some viewing this king's decision? It shall be unto them as a what? As a false divination in their sight, who have sworn oaths unto them, but he bringeth iniquity to remembrance, that they may be taken. Oh, what a sentence. We gave oaths to Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to not destroy us. We're going to be okay with him. Zedekiah broke his oaths. He wanted to depend upon Egypt. He broke the oaths with him, and it's in chapter 36 of 2 Chronicles. When you broke an oath, you broke it with God. You made an oath to a king. You said, you swore by God that indeed you would comply with them. And God's been sending Jeremiah go and tell the people to submit unto him, because this was going to be the discipline that they're under. No, the scepter of Judah, Zedekiah, he's going to break that. And therefore they thought all this idea of coming here. Why would they think they'd go to Ammon? Who were the Ammonites? Who were their forefathers or mother? Lot's daughters, the oldest one. Youngest one becomes the seed of Moab, Ammonites. Indeed, they're enemies against Judah and the Israelites. And that's what we're observing here. He has a prophecy for them too in the latter part of chapter 21, which we'll get to. But here is the idea of what's coming to them, and we decided to go that way. But it's a false, but he bringeth iniquity to remembrance. God has had enough. They've rejected Jeremiah to the most part. Ezekiel, they're going against his teachings with the people that's already going through captivity. But my mother Jerusalem, she's going to be there. The temple's going to be there. And they were doing everything to discredit this temple as being holy with their idols. But God has had enough. He's long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, but he will come. He always comes in judgment, just as he promised. And that's what we're seeing taking place here. So they were viewing it as a false divination. Now, this is where I think it's an interesting point we'll see. When verse 24, therefore thus saith the Lord Jehovah, because ye have made your iniquity to be remembered, that your transgressions are uncovered, so that in all your doings your sins do appear, and we shall see them, because that ye are come to remembrance, ye shall be taken with the hand. O thou, O deadly wounded wicked one, the Prince of Israel. I'm going to come after him too. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, remove, verse 26, the mitre, and take off the crown. Crown, diadem, maybe of a king. Mitre, the headdress of the high priest or of the priest. Both of them failed. Both of them should be leading the ways of God. And there were the people connected with the priest and offering sacrifices unto God. Remove it. You haven't lived up to a holy priesthood. And the crown shall be no more. I asked the question, is there going to come a king after Zedekiah? Jeconiah continues to live. 37 years later, we find that he's going to be sitting at the table with the king. He finally dies. But Nehemiah wasn't a king. Who was that reserved for? So that which is high is brought low. Exalt that which is low. Abase that which is high. King, priest. I will overturn. I'm turning it over. Overturn it. It says it 3 times. This shall also be no more until what? Till he come whose right it is, who rules in the way of justice, which Judah's king should have. Jesus Christ will. It didn't say Jesus Christ. I think it's a pointer toward that. And it says, and I will give it him. I'm going to give it to him. Of the tribe of Judah, one would come who rules in righteousness, when the last king was so far away from that. And all of a sudden we'll have the intertestamental period. We have all that, but there's no king. That's reserved for the one who is the tribe of Judah, who's the King of kings and Lord of lords. And that's pointing to me to Jesus Christ. The diadem, this ruling part, is that idea of that crown. So that closes that part, leaves it open for us to realize the messianic aspects of Ezekiel as well as Daniel and Jeremiah. But in very beginning verse 28, we began to see the points about Ammon that is there. And I want us I just want us to look at that. We didn't have a question concerning that. But in the latter part of this, thus said the Lord Jehovah concerning the children of Ammon, this is why they're going to be judged. A sword is drawn. We got that sword going, don't we? For the slaughter, it is polished. It's for the slaughter, it's polished. To cause it to devour, that it may be as lightning, flashing with the slaughtering slices against the bodies of the people. While they see for these false visions, while they divine lies unto thee, because they're doing things by divinationists too, to lay thee upon the necks of the wicked that are deadly wounded, whose day is come in the time of the iniquity of the end. Cause it to return into its sheath, meaning put your sword back in your scabbard, Ammon. You're not going to win in this battle. Put it back there in the place where thou wast created, in the land of thy birth, and I will judge thee. You're not going to win this battle, just like Jerusalem isn't winning theirs. And I will pour out mine indignation upon thee. I will blow upon thee with the fire of my wrath, and will deliver thee into the hand of brutish men, skillful to destroy. Thou shalt be for fuel for the fire. Thy blood shall be the midst of the land. Thou shalt be no more remembered. It will no more be a nation. For I, Jehovah, have spoken it. Fast forward with me to chapter 25. And maybe you'll see why Ammon is being judged as well. Babylon's going to take care of them too. But he's coming to Jerusalem. He made a choice. He's going to take them first. And so he will speak about verse 5. I will make Rabbah a stable for camels, the children of Ammon for a couching place for flocks. You shall know that I am Jehovah. Why? For thus saith the Lord Jehovah, because thou hast clapped thy hands, stamped with the feet, and rejoiced with all the despite of thy soul against the land of Israel. Therefore, behold, I've stretched out my hand upon thee. I'll deliver thee for a spoil to the nations, and I will cut off from the peoples, and I will cause thee to perish out of the countries. I will destroy thee. Thou shalt know that I am Jehovah. Part of the ways that we know who Jehovah is by his judgments. It'd be too late for a lot of people when hell is a reality to them. It's a reality now. But you'll know I'm Jehovah. I spoke it, it's done. They clapped at the destruction of the captivity of the Israelites, the people of Judah in Jerusalem. They clapped when that happened. They were enemies with the Jews. And indeed, they were involved in being happy about that sort of thing. And God says, because you did that, you despised my people, therefore you despise me. And he's going to take, so that's how chapter 21 ends. Any comments? The sword is fearful. We're in a time where they lived, and that was so warfare. High horses, horsemen, that was important because that's a pretty big beast, and they're riding high. And the soldiers can yell, and they can wield those swords, and they fight their battles hand to hand like they did in those days. That was a frightful and fearful thing. And the people indeed were slaughtered. All right, come to chapter 22. What did Jerusalem do to become dross? What do we mean by dross? David?
You also say impurity.
All right, so what does that mean?
Impurity, for example, if you're some precious metal like silver, for example.
And so you're purifying the metal. Jerusalem is the dross of silver. And so there's two facets of that. We're going to purge it of its impurities. That's kind of what we're seeing here, all the sins that are taking place, but it was still going to be purified. And Jerusalem was the melting pot, wasn't it? We're going to bring all this together, and it's going to melt it all together. And Jerusalem, you're the dross because that's the impurity. And there'll be a remnant that will be saved coming back from captivity. But that's the picture. It's just all put in there together with the tin and with all the other metals, and it purifies it. But they're going to be destroyed. So he says, man, the house of Israel become dross unto me. Impurity is there. Verse 19, therefore Jehovah says, because ye are become dross, therefore will I gather you into the midst of Jerusalem. There's your melting place. That gathers silver and brass and iron and lead and tin in the midst of the furnace to blow the fire upon it to melt it. So will I gather you in mine anger and in my wrath. I will lay you there and melt you. I'll melt you. The impurities. Yeah, I will gather you and blow upon you with the fire of my wrath, and you shall be melted in the midst thereof. As silver is melted in the midst of the furnace, ye shall be melted in the midst thereof, and ye shall know I, Jehovah, have poured out my wrath upon you. Now, why were they so impure? What do we see here? We saw in chapter 18, which shows personal responsibility for our sins. It can't blame it on the fathers. And the fathers can't blame it on the son. We saw a lot of these sins spoken about. Of what the righteous, what they do, and the righteous, what they don't do, and righteous, what they do, but what the unrighteous, what they're not going to do, and what actually they do that's so sinful. So we pick up on this, but there's 3 that are added to all those lists. A lot of them are enumerated here, but it goes a little more detail here as we get into these condemnations. Behold, the princes of Israel, verse 6, and every one according to his power hath been to shed blood. So there's your kings. There's the people in power. They're shedding innocent blood. In thee have they set light by father and mother. They set light by father and mother. That is a personal, private relationship, and it's showing it's a terminology that shows disrespect. And we'll see that one of the commandments of God, if you cursed your parents, show disrespect to them, curse them, you were to be put to death. But he said, like you don't consider their private relationship worthy enough. You set light upon that. You despise that relationship. Cursed be my mother and father. All those concepts are there. He says, thou have dealt oppression with the sojourner. He moves from there. Here's the people of sojourner. You've oppressed them. Thou hast despised my holy things, hast profaned my Sabbaths. That was a time of rest. They're doing commerce. Priests are not saying a word about it. They just go along with it. Slanderous men have been in thee to shed blood. They slander you, lie about you, and you're put to death. And they have eaten upon the mountains in the midst of having their feast days in the mountains with their idolatrous ways. They've committed lewdness. They've uncovered their father's nakedness, having sex with mom. And thee have they humbled her that was unclean in her impurity, against the law of Moses. One hath committed abomination with his neighbor's wife, and another adultery with her. Another hath lewdly defiled his daughter-in-law, sex with her. Another with thee hath humbled his sister. That's on his father's side. You have marriages, and that was stepsister on his father's daughter. And then have they taken bribes to shed blood. Not only we're going to slander someone, we'll take the money and we'll have them killed. This is God's people at one time. These are the Israelites, Judah. Thou hast taken interest and increase, and thou hast greedily gained of thy neighbors by oppression. To greedily gain something by oppressing someone. They didn't sell you something. They didn't ask you to take this as a gift. You oppressed them because you had the power because of your greed. By oppression, and has forgotten me, saith the Lord Jehovah. That's why the sword's coming. Behold, therefore, I have smitten my hand at thy dishonest gain which thou hast made, at thy blood which thou been in the midst of thee. Can thy heart endure, or can thy hands be strong in the days that I shall deal with thee? Rhetorical question. What's the answer? No. No. I have spoken, says Jehovah, and will do it. And I will scatter thee among the nations, disperse thee among the countries. I will consume thy filthiness out of thee. Idea of the dross and purifying the metals. Thou shalt be profaned in thyself, in the sight of the nations. Thou shalt know that I am Jehovah. The word of God came to me, and there's where the melting pot comes in. Horrible. A lot of them sexual perversion. A lot of them treating the foreigners that come in, oppressing them. Slander, having power to take one's life, do that for a bribe. Now, is that happening today? Sexual perversion? City government, bribes. Not our city, but city. There's cities where people take bribes because they can get by with it. There's loopholes, get the money in there, and I'll take the kickback. And we'll get those contracts out. It's happening right in front of our eyes all the time. People can be corrupt. And when they left God, just like in Romans 1, sexual perversion is there, violence is there. What is our country? And it says, we have violence in our country? disrespect for law, disrespect for order, disrespect for God, disrespect for the Bible. We're living in those times. And we have to realize how quick we can become that, where God said, this is what they were when I came in judgment upon them. How quickly we can do that as a God-fearing Christian nation. And all it does is take God out of the schools. We're not even going to mention Him. We're going to put down the Bible. And anything connected to the Bible, we're going to censor our speech is being censored. Not exactly mine, but people are speaking things that have a platform that's scary to people like that. They're silencing those people. And there's the impurities there. How is God going to deal with that? We'll see. But we need to be as righteous as we can be in that and not be influenced by that. But I just want you to pay attention that a lot of ways we turned it, our institutions have been perverted by false ideas and understanding of what our country is made of. And you go back and look at the original ones, forefathers. Nobody wants to go back to them. But why did this country get formed? Why was this experiment here? As long as you can have it, Benjamin Franklin said, you got a republic where we have an opportunity to vote and have our leaders. But it can be kept. We can lose that. Reagan said you can lose it in a generation. I believe that. Just a generation doesn't know God, doesn't mind taking life, doesn't mind murdering people for their own gain, doesn't mind doing that because they think that's just. And then we have a country that lets you burn down a town. Get the police out of the town. Let them burn down, and nothing is done. There's a concept, because we've been untethered from the Bible. Just moral people used to know their Bible. We're living in that generation. We got to teach the young generation, here's the Bible, here's what it says. And we got to live that out, because that's what the problem is. So what did God not find to avoid the destruction of Jerusalem? We go, look at verse 30 with me. And I sought for a man among them that should build up the wall and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. Looking for one man. You got Ezekiel. You got Jeremiah. Got Jeremiah over here in Jerusalem. Got Ezekiel here in Babylon. There you go. I found none, God said. And what he's saying is that he's been looking at the leaders of the land, the priest and the king and the priest. And none of those leaders were doing that. But remember, if there's 10 people, God said, he promised if there's 10 people righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah, he wouldn't take it. He wouldn't destroy it. But here the people are so engulfed in all their sins, there's not a man to stand in the gap. Because what are they doing? They're not listening to Ezekiel, the man, son of man. They're not listening to Jeremiah, so therefore they're not listening to whom? God. No man's there to stop it. I'm coming in judgment. And on that good note, we have to quit. But we know they come back. There's a remnant. And we may have to go through a purging thing in our own nation sometime, but we can survive that, because our kingdom is a spiritual kingdom that cannot be destroyed. But we can look around us. Ezekiel is being made to look around and see the sin. God's people can get pretty bad if we start listening to God. And we'll stop on that one. Next week our gospel meeting will start, so we'll pick up this after the gospel meeting and be studying on through Ezekiel, and I'll be getting the lessons out. I can. Thank you.